The phone started ringing on a Sunday. Not the polite kind, the desperate kind. Users logging in to find their balances frozen. Withdrawal requests queuing, then failing, then disappearing entirely. In the span of 72 hours, the world's second-largest cryptocurrency exchange had stopped functioning. No announcement, no explanation, just silence where $8 billion used to be. Until that week, the man responsible had been on the cover of Fortune magazine. Forbes had called him a visionary. Washington had taken his calls. He was 30 years old. $8 billion in customer money. Gone. The question that would consume regulators, prosecutors, and a million ordinary account holders was the same one hanging in the air that Sunday morning. Where, exactly, had it all gone? To understand the scale of what collapsed, you have to understand how completely the world had decided to trust it. By the autumn of 2022, FTX was not merely a successful cryptocurrency exchange. It was, in the eyes of the financial press, the institutional world, and a significant portion of Washington's policy community, the responsible face of an industry that badly needed one. Its founder, Sam Bankman-Fried, had cultivated that image with extraordinary precision. He testified before Congress. He met with regulators. He donated to political campaigns on both sides of the aisle, according to Federal Election Commission records, becoming one of the largest individual donors in the 2022 midterm cycle. He wore cargo shorts to those meetings. The dishevelment was part of the brand. The implicit message was, I am too busy building something important to care about appearances. It worked. At its peak valuation, FTX was worth $32 billion. Sequoia Capital, SoftBank, the Ontario Teachers' Pension Plan, institutions whose entire professional identity rested on rigorous due diligence, had all written checks. The exchange had naming rights to a Miami sports arena. It had run Super Bowl advertisements featuring celebrities. It had positioned itself as the place where crypto grew up. Bankman-Fried had founded FTX in 2019 alongside a small team, and the company had grown at a speed that made conventional financial analysis almost irrelevant. By 2021, it was processing billions in daily trading volume. By 2022, it had over 1 million registered users. And alongside FTX, Bankman-Fried operated a separate entity, Alameda Research, a quantitative trading firm he had founded earlier in 2017. The two companies shared leadership, shared personnel, and, as investigators would later establish, shared far more than that. At the time, this arrangement attracted little scrutiny. The public story was coherent. FTX held customer funds. Alameda traded its own capital. The wall between them was presented as firm. Bankman-Fried also cultivated a philosophical framework that journalists found compelling. He spoke publicly about effective altruism, the idea that the purpose of accumulating wealth was to give it away as efficiently as possible. He pledged the majority of his fortune to charity. This framing made skepticism feel almost churlish. To question FTX was, in some coverage, to question the possibility of ethical capitalism itself. The admiration was genuine, widespread, and, as events would demonstrate, almost entirely misplaced. On the 2nd of November, 2022, the cryptocurrency news outlet CoinDesk published a leaked document. It was Alameda Research's balance sheet, and what it showed was not the balance sheet of an independent trading firm operating at arm's length from FTX. It showed that a very large portion of Alameda's assets consisted of FTT, the native token issued by FTX itself. A token that FTX controlled the supply of, a token whose value depended, in circular fashion, on the health of FTX. The implication was stark. If Alameda's collateral was largely composed of an asset that FTX itself had created, then the separation between the exchange and the trading firm was not a wall. It was an accounting entry. The market read it the same way. Within days, Changpeng Zhao, the founder of Binance, FTX's largest competitor, announced on social media that Binance would liquidate its holdings of FTT, worth approximately $580 million. He cited, in his public post, concerns about risk. That single announcement triggered a bank run. In the days that followed, customers attempted to withdraw an estimated $6 billion from FTX in a 72-hour window, according to reporting by the Wall Street Journal and subsequent court filings. The exchange could not meet those requests. Here is what no one outside a very small circle had seen coming. According to the criminal indictment filed by the United States Department of Justice and the civil complaint filed by the Securities and Exchange Commission, FTX had for years been transferring customer deposits to Alameda Research, not as loans with documented terms, not as disclosed arrangements, as undisclosed transfers used by Alameda to fund trading activity, to make venture capital investments, and to purchase real estate in the Bahamas, where FTX was headquartered. The DOJ indictment alleged that Bankman-Fried had directed these transfers while concealing them from customers, investors, and lenders. The scale of what was missing began to emerge in the days after the exchange froze withdrawals. John J. Ray III, the restructuring specialist appointed as FTX's new chief executive after Bankman-Fried resigned, filed a declaration in the Delaware bankruptcy proceedings describing what he found. Ray had previously overseen the Enron liquidation. He stated in that filing that in his career he had never seen such a complete failure of corporate controls. There were no audited financial statements for the consolidated group. Expenses had been approved via an internal chat application. Corporate funds had been used to purchase property in the names of employees and senior personnel. The company had no accurate list of its own bank accounts. The FTT token, whose inflated value had underpinned Alameda's balance sheet, collapsed in value by more than 80% in under a week. The collateral evaporated. The gap between what FTX owed its customers and what it actually held became, in the language of the bankruptcy filing, a shortfall of approximately $8 billion. That figure would be cited in the DOJ indictment, the SEC complaint, and the CFTC complaint filed against Bankman-Fried and associated entities. $8 billion that customers believed was sitting safely in their accounts. It was not there. It had not been there for some time. On the 11th of November, 2022, FTX Trading Limited and approximately 130 affiliated entities filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in the United States Bankruptcy Court for the District of Delaware. Sam Bankman-Fried resigned as chief executive the same day. The filing listed both assets and liabilities in the range of $10 to $50 billion, with the actual figures subject to the ongoing reconstruction that Ray's team was undertaking. Bankman-Fried did not immediately return to the United States. He remained in the Bahamas, where FTX had been based, and where Bahamian authorities were conducting their own investigation. He gave a series of interviews to journalists via Twitter Spaces in written posts in which he offered explanations that shifted in emphasis and detail. He described the situation as a failure of risk management. He stated that he had not known the full extent of Alameda's exposure. These statements would later be examined closely in court. Meanwhile, the list of those who had lost money was assembling itself in the bankruptcy docket. Institutional creditors, venture funds, and, most significantly in human terms, the individual account holders, retail customers in the United States and internationally, who had deposited funds believing they were protected. The bankruptcy filing listed over 100,000 creditors. Some estimates, cited in court documents, put the total number of affected customers at over 1 million. On the 12th of December, 2022, Bahamian authorities arrested Sam Bankman-Fried at his apartment in Nassau at the request of the United States government. The following day, the DOJ unsealed an 8-count indictment charging him with wire fraud, securities fraud, commodities fraud, and conspiracy to commit money laundering, among other charges. The SEC and CFTC filed parallel civil complaints the same day. Several of Bankman-Fried's closest associates had already begun cooperating with federal prosecutors. Caroline Ellison, who had served as chief executive of Alameda Research, pleaded guilty to 7 federal charges, including wire fraud and conspiracy to commit securities fraud. Ryan Salami, co-chief executive of FTX Digital Markets, pleaded guilty to charges including conspiracy to make unlawful political contributions and conspiracy to operate an unlicensed money-transmitting business. Nishad Singh, FTX's former head of engineering, and Gary Wang, co-founder of FTX, both pleaded guilty to multiple federal charges and agreed to cooperate. The trial of Sam Bankman-Fried began in the Southern District of New York in October 2023. It lasted approximately 4 weeks. On the 2nd of November 2023, almost exactly 1 year after the CoinDesk article that had started the unraveling, the jury returned its verdict. Guilty on all 7 counts. Wire fraud against customers, wire fraud against lenders, securities fraud, commodities fraud, conspiracy to commit money laundering. The jury deliberated for fewer than 5 hours. In March 2024, Judge Lewis Kaplan sentenced Bankman-Fried to 25 years in federal prison. The judge noted, according to court transcripts, that there was a risk Bankman-Fried might commit fraud again if given the opportunity. The assets recovered through the bankruptcy process, while substantial, were projected to cover only a portion of what customers were owed. The FTX bankruptcy became one of the most complex financial restructurings in American history. John Ray's team, working through 2023 and into 2024, pursued asset recovery across multiple jurisdictions. They clawed back funds from venture investments, real estate holdings, and third-party transfers. By mid-2024, the bankruptcy estate had recovered sufficient assets that its administrators announced they expected to pay customers back in full, at the dollar values held at the time of the bankruptcy filing in November 2022, rather than at current cryptocurrency market prices, a distinction that generated its own legal disputes given the subsequent recovery in crypto valuations. The political dimension of the collapse drew sustained attention. The scale of Bankman-Fried's political donations, documented in FEC filings, prompted congressional scrutiny of the relationship between the crypto industry and its regulators. Several members of Congress who had received donations from Bankman-Fried or associated individuals donated those funds to charity following the collapse. The question of whether FTX's regulatory engagement had been a genuine attempt to shape responsible policy or a strategy to delay oversight became a matter of significant public and legal debate, with the DOJ's framing firmly in the latter camp. The institutional investors who had backed FTX faced their own reckonings. Sequoia Capital wrote down its approximately $214 million investment to zero within days of the collapse. The Ontario Teachers' Pension Plan wrote down its $95 million investment. SoftBank reported a loss on its position. These were not small funds run by inexperienced operators. They were among the most sophisticated pools of capital in the world. The due diligence they had conducted, or had not conducted, became a case study in how narrative momentum and founder charisma can substitute, in the minds of experienced investors, for basic financial verification. The cooperating witnesses provided, in their guilty pleas and in Bankman-Fried's trial, a detailed account of how the alleged fraud had operated internally. According to those court proceedings, the movement of customer funds to Alameda had been known to a small group of senior personnel. The special treatment Alameda received on the FTX platform, including an ability to maintain a negative balance that other users did not have, had been coded into the system deliberately, according to testimony. The gap between the public presentation of FTX and its internal reality was, by the account of those who pleaded guilty, not an accident of poor management, but a sustained and deliberate concealment. For the customers who had deposited funds, the retail traders, the small investors, the people who had moved savings into what they believed was a regulated and solvent exchange, The process of recovery was measured in years, not weeks. Whatever the eventual recovery rate, the months of uncertainty, the frozen accounts, the unanswered support tickets, represented a real and documented harm that no balance sheet recovery could fully address. The one thing the FTX collapse made undeniable, not as a moral lesson, but as a documented, adjudicated fact, is this. The absence of basic financial controls is not a symptom of a fast-moving startup. It is, in a company holding other people's money, the precondition for catastrophic loss. Ray's declaration said it plainly. The jury's verdict said it plainly. The absence of audited statements, segregated accounts, and independent oversight was not an oversight. It was the mechanism.